Hey everyone! I have said it before and I'm saying it again. Friday night at 6 is never good. I always have all these plans. I have the topic set up. I've got all the slides ready to go. It is Friday night at 2 minutes of 6 that the computer always decides that it's going to reboot the program. Not necessarily the computer, it's the software that I'm using. And it's the end of the week. I want to celebrate being done. As much as everyone else. I keep threatening that I'm going to change this from Friday night to some other time, but I really need to do it. Anyway, welcome. I am here. Sorry, it's a little bit late. I wanted to talk tonight about the differences between appointments and schedules, because I find that many times employees are confused between these two things, and it really does matter. So the appointment, when I talk about that, I want to know whether you were a permanent employee, a temporary or a term employee, or whether you had some money in there and then you left the government at one time and now you're back, and should you put that money back or not. So those are the things. When I talk about appointments, that's what I mean. What kind of job is it? Not what are you doing, but how did you get into that job, versus a schedule, which could be full-time or part-time, or even intermittent. So a lot of times when I'm teaching classes, people will come in and I'll ask them, have you always been permanent? And they'll think about it for a minute and they'll say, oh yeah, I've always worked full-time. That doesn't tell me anything, because you could be permanent or temporary or term and also full-time or part-time or intermittent. So it's really important when we talk about becoming eligible for retirement and how much that retirement is going to be, to understand the types of positions that we've had. And yes, schedules are important as well, but I think it's more important to know what type of appointment it was. So it really does matter. Hey, Robert, I haven't seen you in forever. So good to see you on here. So I am Debbie Hatch. I am the owner and CEO of Pinnacle Personnel Services, and I've been helping people understand their retirement for a long time. I like to do these short segments because I get an opportunity to talk to people live. 15, 20 minutes is the max that I try to keep myself to, but answering any questions that folks may have about their federal retirement and just trying to clarify some things that maybe you've never even thought of before. And now as you move towards retirement, you understand that these things are very, very important. So specifically tonight, what I'm talking about is the federal retirement system. So if you work for the federal government, you could be under CSRS, which is the old system. You could be under FERS, which is the new system. And you could be under something that's called CSRS offset, which is a hybrid model that's stuck in the middle. So if you came on board before 1983, you were under CSRS if it was a permanent position. See, again, we already know, right? Permanent and temporary is going to come into making some big differences here. But if you were a permanent employee working for the federal government before 1983, you were under CSRS. If you came 1983 or later and you didn't have any prior federal time, then you're under FERS. Regardless of what system you're covered under, when you retire from your federal job, your pension is computed by multiplying your creditable length of service times your high 3 average salary times a formula. And how you retire and the kind of work that you do drives the formula. We've talked about that a couple of times before, and we can talk about it again. If you have questions, let me know. But my intent tonight is not to get deep into the high 3 average salary nor the formula. What I want to focus on is that creditable length of service piece, because it's not just one thing. There can be as many as 7 different things that count towards creditable length of service. Your sick leave can be added in. Again, a topic that stands by itself, and we've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again, but not tonight. Your sick leave. Your military deposited time, which means that you came in as a federal civilian, but you also had prior military time and you've bought that time back. You've made a military deposit. And civilian time. Now, I said there could be 7 different things. That's because sick leave is one thing by itself, but military service can be 3 different things. It depends on whether the person retired active duty, they retired from the reserves, or they didn't retire but they served in the military. And civilian time also has 3 potential pieces to it. We have something that's called covered service, something else called non-deduction service, and then the third thing, which is redeposit service. And that's really what I want to focus on tonight. So in the classroom, what I tell people is covered service is the easiest. You don't need to really think about this. Now, I don't even want you to read the slide at this point. I just want you to listen to me for a minute. If you're employed by the federal government in a permanent position, meaning it's not temporary, you don't have an ending date, you're just working, then you are paying into the retirement system. Whether that's CSRS or FERS, you have to contribute something from your paycheck into that retirement account. So if you are working and you're paying something in, it doesn't matter what system, it doesn't matter how much, all of that time is covered under the retirement umbrella. Meaning, if you're paying in, you're getting credit towards being eligible to retire, and you're also getting credit towards the calculation of that retirement check. It's a deposit, but you know what I mean, right? It counts. And doesn't that make sense? I mean, if you're paying in, you should get credit. If you're paying in, you do, but what we call that technically is covered service. Now, there are a number of times that you're going to get credit for paying into the retirement, even though you're not. And that's what the slide is talking about. So the first one says if you have really small breaks in service, if you leave the federal government, like you resign, you're out. But sometime over the next couple of days, you find a federal job and you come back in. As long as that break was for 3 days or less, you continue to be covered. It's a small amount of time. We're only talking about a maximum of 3 days. It's incredibly rare because it takes a while to get hired on and it takes a while to get in processed. But those small breaks in service do count. They are covered service. Leave without pay counts. And this can be up to 6 months in any calendar year that the employee is being carried in a leave without pay status. So as a federal employee, I can request leave without pay for any number of reasons. The reason doesn't matter. If my agency approves me for leave without pay, I get credit for up to 6 months in a calendar year. So the example that I frequently will use in class is as a military spouse. If my spouse has orders, we're moving, I don't have a job, I don't resign, but rather I request leave without pay and it's approved, then some or all of that time can count for me. It depends on when I go into the leave without pay status. If I go in June, I get credit for the whole year because I have July to December in one calendar year and January to June in the next. But if I go into the leave without pay status in January, then I'd only get credit for 6 months because once I hit that wall, the service computation date is frozen. And it's going to sit right there until I come back to work, whenever I come back to work. So I was on leave without pay, and let's say it was for a year. It ran from January to December. I only get credit for 6 months. So in June, my service comp date was frozen. But when I came back in 6 months after that, they picked it up from where it was. They moved it 6 months in the future. Happens all the time whenever a person has a break in service that's more than 3 days or leave without pay that's more than 6 months in a calendar year. If an individual is hurt on the job and they file a workers' comp claim, that's accepted as a valid claim. That does not have the cap of the 6 months assigned to it. And then we have something in some agencies, they don't exist everywhere, that's called PSE, or Permanent Seasonal Employees. These employees work a specific season. That could be a fire season, that could be a tax season, something like that. But they come back year after year. These employees are placed into a non-pay status outside of their work season. So, just like with the leave without pay, as long as that doesn't exceed 6 months in the calendar year, it doesn't change anything. This time is counting towards eligibility for retirement and, again, computation of that retirement payment. And all of this stuff is just called covered service, the technical term for it, okay? You might also have something that's called non-deduction service. Now, non-deduction service is a temporary appointment. It is a time when you're working for the federal government, but you're not contributing into the retirement system. If you are under the old retirement system, CSRS, even though you were in this time-limited appointment, because I had a not-to-exceed date, you were in this time-limited appointment, you weren't paying into the retirement system. Under CSRS, you can sometimes still get free credit for that, even though you weren't paying in. It depends on when it was. So you can see the date that's important here is October 1st of 1982. As a CSRS person, if I had a temporary appointment before that date, I don't have to pay anything. It will count towards making me eligible and the computation of my benefits. But if I don't pay today for what I didn't pay back when I was in that non-deduction appointment, there will be a reduction applied to my retirement. And that will equal 10% of whatever it would have cost me to buy that time back. If I'm a CSRS person and my non-deduction appointment was after that October of 1982 date, it does count to make me eligible even if I don't pay for it, but it won't be used in the calculation of my benefit unless I do pay for it. That's a little bit different. Under FERS, that retirement system that's been in place from 1983 through today, the relevant date is January 1st of 1989. If I had a temporary appointment before January 1st of 1989, I can pay for it. They would charge me 1.3% of whatever I made in that job plus interest up to today. If I pay that, it's called making a deposit. If I make a deposit, that temporary appointment becomes covered service. It's going to count. If I don't pay this money or make this deposit, that time doesn't count for any purpose. It doesn't count towards making me eligible, and it also doesn't count in the calculation of my benefits. And if that non-deduction appointment under FERS occurred on or after January 1st of 1989, I am normally not even able to buy that time back anymore. There are some exceptions to that. One big one being if I was in the Peace Corps. I can still make a deposit for Peace Corps time even after that 1989 cutoff, but generally that's when that cutoff is going to end. Now, they talk about it in Congress all the time, extending that date and allowing employees to be able to make deposits even after 1989, but to this point, that has not happened. Now, when I'm talking about the covered service and the non-deduction, these are appointments. These are appointments. And the reason that it's so important to know whether you're in a permanent or a temporary position is that the permanent positions count towards retirement, eligibility, and computation. The temporary positions don't unless you've made a deposit, unless you've paid for it. And some people can pay for it, some people can't pay for it. So if you're not really sure, you remember, at one time, I came into the federal government and I had an NTE, that stands for not to exceed. I had an NTE position, but I don't really remember, was that temporary or it might have been term, because term appointments have NTE too. Generally, the term appointments are covered. They give retirement eligibility. The temporary ones don't. So it can get confusing. One way that you can figure it out for yourself is to go back and look at the Standard Form 50 personnel action from when you were in that time-limited appointment. Look at Block 30, 30. Block 30 will say, CSRS or CSRS special or CSRS and FICA, which means that the person is paying both into CSRS and also into Social Security. It might say FERS or FERS special or FERS RE or FERS FRE or FERS and FICA. If it mentions any of the federal retirement systems, that's a covered position. You don't have to worry about it. But if you look at Block 30 and all it says is FICA, that means that all you're paying is Social Security. You're not paying into retirement. That's a non-deduction appointment. Now we have to go back and look at that 1982 date or that 1989 date to figure out whether you can buy it or not, to figure out whether it can count or not. Super important to understand these, guys, if you work for the federal government, because you can have several service computation dates. A lot of people don't know that. We many times are aware of only one, and that's for leave, because that one shows up on our paperwork. We can see it on our leave and earning statement or our pay stub. We can also see it on our standard form 50. That is going to show up in block number 31. I'm trying to go to the next slide. There we go. Block number 31, leave only. It tells us whether to give you 4, 6, or 8 hours of annual leave per pay period. Your temporary time, your non-deduction appointment, can count towards leave, not towards retirement, unless you pay for it, unless you can pay for it. So there can be two very different things. And a lot of times, again, federal employees are not aware that their retirement service computation date does not show up on their standard form 50, nor does it show up on their leave and earning statement. That retirement service computation date is constructed by taking the leave date and then adding additional time for time that counted for leave but won't count for retirement. Yeah, adding, I said. I didn't say subtracting, okay? Here's an example. Let's say that I came to the federal government for the very first time in 1990, but my first 2 years was in a non-deduction temporary appointment. When I look at my service computation date for leave, it's going to say 1990, and that's correct because it is counting for leave. But when I'm constructing my retirement service comp date, I need to add 2 years to that. Leave started in 1990. Retirement doesn't start until 1992. And nowhere on this form does it show me my retirement service computation date. So I need to be aware of it. I can look in my EOPF. If you have EPP, some agencies utilize that. You can usually find your retirement service computation date in there. You can talk to your agency's human resources office about where to find it, but it's not on your pay stub and it's not in your standard form 50. Okay, so we have covered, we have non-deduction or those temporary appointments. We also have redeposit. Redeposit just means that you were working for the federal government in a covered position. You were paying in, but at some point you left. You resigned. And not only did you resign, but you also contacted OPM and you pulled the money that you had contributed into the retirement account out. You took it with you and you went and did something else for a while. But eventually you're reemployed by the government. You have the opportunity to redeposit that money with interest, of course. If you redeposit it, it's covered service. If you don't redeposit it, then it depends on whether you're under CSRS or FERS and when you pulled this money out. So under CSRS, there's a big difference between March 1st of 1991, before and after that date. You pull it out before, you don't have to put it back. It's going to count for time and money, but there's going to be a reduction. If you pulled it out after that and you don't put it back, it counts for eligibility. That means you can use it to retire, to become eligible to retire, but it won't be used in the calculation of your benefit or your retirement check. That's how it always works for FERS too. If I had 5 years in, I quit, I pulled that 5 years out, I did something else for 10 years, I came back to work, I worked for 15, I never paid it back. 5 and 15 is 20. If I have 20 years and I'm 60, yeah, I can retire, but my retirement payment would only be based upon that 15 years, not that additional 5, unless I put it back. Okay, so all of these are appointments. Now here's the difference. A schedule is just that. It just tells me how many hours you're working. And whether you are permanent or temporary or term, you are also assigned to a schedule. Most people are working full-time. Full-time for our federal employees is 80 hours in the biweekly pay period. If you're working full-time, you're getting full-time credit towards eligibility, towards computation. Makes sense. Some of our employees are working in a schedule called intermittent, which means they work only when we need them to. They don't have any guarantee to any number of hours. It could be 2 hours this week and 48 hours next week and 12 the week after that. On an intermittent schedule, you get credit only when you're actually working, not the entire time that you're being carried on the rolls. Some employees are working part-time. Now, part-time is a little bit different than intermittent because these people have a guaranteed minimum number of hours. They might work more, but they're never going to work less. And part-time is really, really unique because it does count towards creditable service, towards the high 3. It's not going to change my formula at all, but it will drive a fraction that's going to be applied to my payment at the end of my career. And I want to talk about that for just a second. Lisa, how are you? Lisa says, this is really important. I was student hire for 9 months. I need to look at my EOPF to see if that is counted. I don't think it does, but I need to make sure. One thing to note, when accessing eBiz, you can only see Standard Form 50s from the past 10 years. I'll need to request a copy from the previous years. Yeah, you really do need to request that, Lisa. It's super important for you to know. I mean, 9 months doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 9 months that would get you closer to retirement, and that's almost a year that would be included in your retirement computation as well. With the student hire position, so if it was a true student hire, it probably was a non-deduction appointment. It probably wasn't covered. If it was an intern position, those are normally permanent. Those are normally covered if it was a formal intern. So definitely, Lisa, you need to check that out. And I need to send you an email too when I hop off here because I'm planning to come your way later on in August. So I want to touch base with you. But yeah, super important. Okay, so here's what I meant with the part-time service. When I said it doesn't change my creditable service, my high 3 or the formula, but it will drive a proration at the end. If you and I were hired on the very same day and you're working 40 hours a week, but I'm only working 20 hours a week, I don't have to work longer than you to become eligible to retire. We're going to get there together because it doesn't change my creditable length of service. It counts the same if I was working full or part-time. Regardless of how much money I'm bringing home, because I'm getting half of this paycheck and you're getting all of it, that doesn't matter. The high 3 average salary is tied to the job. So if our jobs were the same, with the same series, the same grade level or equivalent, and we would have been making the same amount of money if I was working full time, then our high 3 average salary is going to be the same. So as we figure out what this pension is going to be, we're multiplying creditable service. That's the same for both of us. We're multiplying high 3 average salary. Our jobs were the same. The salary was the same. That's the same for both of us. And if we retire the same way, the formula is going to be the same for both of us. So in the first step of calculating that pension, we have the same amount of money, but you worked 40 hours a week and I only worked 20. At the end, and this is what I want to stress, it doesn't change any part of the retirement equation. It's applied at the end once that equation is completed. We're going to get into your records and we're going to look at how many hours you actually worked from the day you were hired until the day you retired. Full-time, part-time, all of it. Add it up, and we're going to compare the number of hours that you actually worked to the number of hours a full-time person would have worked over that same period of time. So in my example where I said I was working 20 hours a week, let's assume I did that my whole career. That means that I worked 50% of the hours that you did. You get 100% of the retirement check. I get 50% of the retirement check because I only worked 50% of the hours. If I worked full-time most of my career, but the last 3 or 4 years I cut back to a part-time job, well, Maybe my proration is going to be, 87, 88, 90%. There's still going to be one, but it has less of an impact the longer I work full-time and the more hours I work part-time. So hopefully now you can see that there's a really big difference between an appointment where you were permanent or temporary or term and a schedule where you were full-time, part-time, or intermittent. That's what I wanted to cover tonight because, as I said, a lot of times employees will come in and they don't know that there's a difference. You may be like Lisa and have some homework that you're going to need to go and take some time to figure out for yourself prior to retirement so that you're ready to go when that day comes. If you have any questions, if you want to reach out and let me know what your concerns are with retirement or with any of your insurances or benefits, you can do that right in the comments, or you can go to my website. You can send me an email, Debbie@PinnaclePersonnelServices.com. I am hopping off here and starting my weekend. I hope that you have a fantastic one. I hope that this was helpful. Let me know what I can do to help you. Please get ready for your retirement. Lisa and Robert, thank you so much for joining me live. That means a lot. So happy to see both of you pop up there.